Hello, and welcome back to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you're curled up in bed, settling into your favorite chair, or simply seeking a gentle escape from the day's noise, you've found the perfect refuge. Tonight, we're stepping into a moonlit garden where everything appears peaceful and still. But beneath this tranquil surface lies one of Earth's most ancient and sophisticated conflicts. A secret war that's been raging for over 400 million years, fought not with claws or teeth, but with chemistry itself. This is the hidden battle between plants and animals, where every leaf is a tiny laboratory brewing invisible weapons, and every bite of food represents a victory or defeat in an epic struggle for survival. It's happening right now, all around you, in ways more elegant and devious than any human warfare. Before we begin our gentle descent into this world of molecular battlefields and chemical conspiracies, I'd be deeply grateful if you could tap that like button and consider subscribing. It helps keep this sleepy corner of science alive and whispering into the night. And please, share with me in the comments. Where are you listening from? Are you in a garden right now? Or perhaps gazing out at trees from your window? As always, I hope this isn't so fascinating that it keeps you wide awake. But if it does, at least you'll drift off knowing the remarkable secrets hidden in every flower, every leaf, every breath of evening air. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and let's discover the beautiful warfare blooming quietly in the darkness around us. Picture, if you will, a quiet meadow on a summer afternoon. The grass sways gently in the breeze, wildflowers nod their colourful heads, and somewhere nearby, a tree spreads its broad leaves like a green umbrella against the Sunday. Everything seems so peaceful, so still, so utterly defenseless. We humans, with our restless energy and constant motion, look at plants and see victims waiting to happen. After all, they can't run when danger approaches. They can't hide behind rocks or burrow underground. They simply stand there, rooted in place, apparently offering themselves up as an all-you-can-eat buffet for any hungry creature that happens by. But what if I told you that this perception is one of the greatest illusions in nature? What if the stillness you see is actually the quiet confidence of master warriors, armed with some of the most sophisticated weapons on Earth? You see, plants have been perfecting the art of chemical warfare for over 400 million years. While animals were learning to run and hide and fight, plants were becoming chemists. Every leaf, every stem, every root is essentially a tiny pharmaceutical laboratory, constantly brewing compounds that can heal, harm, or completely reorganize the nervous system of anything that dares to take a bite. Think of it this way. Imagine you're walking through what appears to be a peaceful village, but every house is actually a weapons factory. The baker isn't just making bread, he's synthesizing nerve agents. The florist isn't arranging pretty bouquets, she's distilling hallucinogens. The pharmacist isn't dispensing medicine, well actually he is, but some of those medicines could kill you in the wrong dose. This is the secret reality of the plant world. Every leaf is indeed a tiny pharmacy, but pharmacies, as we know, can be quite dangerous places if you don't know what you're doing. Scientists call these weapons secondary metabolites, a rather boring name for what are essentially millions of different chemical compounds that plants produce not to live, but to survive. Unlike primary metabolites, which keep the basic machinery of life running, things like sugars for energy or proteins for structure, secondary metabolites exist for one purpose: warfare. These compounds represent one of evolution's most elegant solutions to an impossible problem. How do you defend yourself when you cannot move? The answer, it turns out, is chemistry. Let's begin our exploration with perhaps the most familiar class of plant weapons: alkaloids. Right now, as you listen to this, you might have some of these compounds coursing through your bloodstream. If you've had coffee today, or tea, or perhaps a piece of chocolate, you've voluntarily ingested what is, from a plant's perspective, a potent pesticide. Caffeine, that beloved stimulant that helps us greet the morning, is actually a sophisticated neurotoxin. When a small insect encounters caffeine in a coffee plant's leaves, its nervous system goes haywire. The insect becomes hyperactive, loses coordination, and often dies from what is essentially a chemically induced panic attack. We humans, being much larger and having livers that can process caffeine relatively efficiently, experience this as a pleasant buzz. But make no mistake, we're drinking bug spray, and we're paying premium prices for the privilege. The coffee plant didn't evolve caffeine to help you through your morning meetings. It evolved caffeine because caterpillars that tried to munch on caffeinated leaves would literally vibrate themselves to death. Even more cleverly, coffee plants don't just put caffeine in their leaves. They also secrete it into the soil around their roots, creating a toxic zone where competing plants struggle to germinate. It's chemical warfare above ground and chemical warfare below ground, all from a plant that just sits there looking innocent. But caffeine is just the beginning. Let's talk about nicotine, another alkaloid that humans have complicated relationships with. Tobacco plants produce nicotine as one of nature's most effective nerve agents. When an insect bites into a tobacco leaf, the nicotine binds to receptors in its nervous system, causing paralysis and death. The plant is essentially performing chemical surgery on its attacker's brain. What's fascinating is how precise these weapons are. Nicotine doesn't just randomly poison cells. It specifically targets nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, the same receptors that, in humans, create the sensation we associate with smoking. The tobacco plant has, over millions of years, evolved a compound that can hijack the neural circuitry of any creature that tries to eat it. We humans, in our infinite creativity, figured out how to enjoy being mildly hijacked. The evolutionary arms race that created these alkaloids is a story that spans geological time. Picture this. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the first insects discovered that plants were basically helpless salad bars. They began to munch away happily, and plants began to die out. But then, through the slow magic of genetic mutation and natural selection, some plants began producing bitter, toxic compounds. Suddenly, the insects that could tolerate these compounds had an advantage. They could eat food that their competitors couldn't touch. So the plants escalated. They made their compounds more toxic, more bitter, more sophisticated. The insects responded by evolving better detoxification systems, more selective feeding behaviors, even the ability to sequester plant toxins for their own defense. And so it went, generation after generation, each side becoming more elaborate in its strategies. This is why your morning coffee contains caffeine, not because some benevolent plant wanted to help you wake up, but because millions of years ago, the ancestors of coffee plants were locked in a life or death struggle with insects, and the plants that made the most effective bug spray were the ones that survived to reproduce. Now, let's turn our attention to another class of chemical weapons, tannins. If you've ever bitten into an unripe persimmon or sipped a very dry red wine, you've experienced tannins firsthand. That puckering, mouth-drying sensation, that's your mouth's way of saying, warning, plant defense compound detected. Tannins get their name from their traditional use in tanning leather. They bind to proteins and make them tough and indigestible. This is exactly what they do when a hungry herbivore tries to eat tannin-rich leaves. The tannins bind to proteins in the animal's saliva and digestive system, creating a sensation that ranges from unpleasant to unbearable. It's as if the plant is turning the inside of the predator's mouth into leather. But tannins are more sophisticated than just creating a bad taste. They actually interfere with protein digestion, meaning that even if an animal powers through the unpleasant sensation, it won't get much nutritional value from its meal. The plant is essentially saying, "Fine, eat me if you must, but you won't enjoy it, and you won't benefit from it." Oak trees are masters of tannin warfare. Their leaves can be up to 10% tannins by weight. Imagine if 10% of your body weight was dedicated to chemical weapons. Caterpillars that try to eat oak leaves often grow slowly and poorly, if they survive at all. The tannins don't just make the leaves taste bad. They actively interfere with the caterpillar's ability to grow and develop. And here's where it gets really interesting. Oak trees don't maintain the same level of tannins year-round. In spring, when their new leaves are tender and vulnerable, tannin levels skyrocket. As the season progresses and the leaves become tougher and less attractive to herbivores, tannin production decreases. The tree is making a calculated economic decision. Invest heavily in chemical defense when you're most vulnerable, then dial it back when the threat decreases. This brings us to our third major class of plant weapons, phenolic compounds. These are perhaps the most diverse group of plant defense chemicals, ranging from simple molecules to complex polymers, all united by their ability to make plant tissue thoroughly unappetizing or outright toxic. Some plants offer better rewards, more nectar, more nutritious pollen, or easier access to these resources. Others use advertising, brighter colors, stronger scents, or more conspicuous displays. Still, others resort to what can only be described as false advertising, producing signals that promise rewards they don't actually deliver. But some plants have gone beyond simple competition into the realm of chemical warfare against their competitors. Certain species produce compounds in their nectar that are mildly toxic to pollinators, not toxic enough to kill them, but toxic enough to make them sluggish and less efficient at visiting other flowers. The plant is essentially drugging its pollinators, slowing them down so they'll spend more time working on its flowers and less time visiting its competitors. It's a strategy that walks a fine line. Too much toxin, and the pollinators will avoid the plant entirely. Too little, and the competitive advantage disappears. Rhododendrons are masters of this strategy. Their nectar contains compounds called granotoxins that have mild psychoactive effects on bees. Bees that drink rhododendron nectar become somewhat intoxicated. They fly more slowly, have trouble navigating, and tend to stay longer on each flower they visit. From the rhododendron's perspective, this is perfect. The bees are more likely to pick up pollen and less likely to fly off to visit competing plants. But the true masters of pollinator manipulation are the orchids, a family that has elevated deception to an art form. Many orchid species produce no nectar rewards at all, instead relying on elaborate deceptions to trick pollinators into visiting their flowers. Some orchids mimic the appearance and scent of female insects, luring male insects to attempt copulation with their flowers. The frustrated males end up covered in pollen, which they inadvertently transfer to the next orchid they attempt to mate with. The orchids get pollination services for free, while the male insects get nothing but sexual frustration. Other orchids mimic the alarm pheromones that insects release when they're being attacked, causing potential pollinators to investigate what they think is a fellow insect in distress. Still, others produce scents that mimic rotting meat, attracting flies that are looking for places to lay their eggs. Perhaps the most elaborate orchid deception involves species that mimic other, more rewarding flowers. These orchids produce visual and chemical signals that are nearly identical to those of nectar-rich flowers that bloom at the same time. Pollinators that have learned to associate these signals with a good meal end up visiting the deceptive orchids, only to find no reward waiting for them. The sophistication of these deceptions is remarkable. Some orchids can mimic not just the general appearance of their models, but specific details like the pattern of nectar guides or the exact chemical composition of attractive scents. The evolutionary pressure to create convincing deceptions has driven some orchids to levels of mimicry that would impress a master forger. But deception is a dangerous game. Pollinators can learn to avoid flowers that don't provide expected rewards, and orchids that rely too heavily on deception may find themselves without any pollinators at all. This has led to an ongoing evolutionary arms race between deceptive plants and increasingly sophisticated pollinators who are better at detecting and avoiding scams. The result is a pollination landscape that resembles nothing so much as a marketplace full of honest merchants, skilled advertisers, and outright con artists, all competing for the attention of increasingly savvy customers. Some plants offer genuine value for the services they receive. Others rely on flashy marketing to attract customers to mediocre products. Still others are running elaborate confidence games, hoping to fool enough customers to stay in business. And just as in human marketplaces, the most successful strategies often involve some combination of genuine value, skilled presentation, and just enough deception to gain an edge over the competition. The plants that thrive are those that can navigate this complex landscape of cooperation and competition, mutualism and exploitation, honest signaling and elaborate deception. The world of plant-animal alliances reveals the fundamental complexity of life on Earth. What appears to be simple cooperation often involves layers of manipulation, exploitation, and evolutionary arms racing. What seems like obvious mutualism may actually be elaborate parasitism in disguise. And what looks like betrayal may actually be the most stable form of cooperation available under the circumstances. These relationships remind us that evolution doesn't create perfect solutions or fair partnerships. It creates whatever works, whatever increases reproductive success, whatever allows species to survive and thrive in a competitive world. The result is a natural world that is far more complex, far more devious, and far more fascinating than simple narratives of cooperation and competition would suggest. In the end, the alliances and betrayals we see in plant-animal relationships reflect the same kinds of complex social and economic relationships that characterize human societies. There are honest traders and skilled negotiators, generous partners and ruthless exploiters, loyal allies and opportunistic betrayers. The main difference is that in the plant world, these relationships have been shaped by millions of years of evolution rather than thousands of years of culture. But the underlying dynamics are remarkably similar. The tension between cooperation and competition, the challenge of building trust in a world full of cheaters, the constant pressure to evolve better strategies for getting what you need while giving as little as possible in return. The plant world, it turns out, is not so different from our own. Beneath your feet, as you sit listening to this, lies a world of warfare that makes the conflicts we see above ground seem almost quaint by comparison. If you could shrink yourself down and journey into the soil, you would find yourself in a landscape that resembles nothing so much as a chemical battlefield, where plants wage war not with visible weapons, but with invisible poisons seeping through the darkness. Most of us think of soil as empty space between plant roots, a passive medium that simply holds plants in place and provides them with water and nutrients. But soil is actually one of the most complex and competitive environments on Earth, a three-dimensional arena where plants fight for territory, resources, and survival using strategies that would make a military strategist envious. The weapon of choice in this underground war is allelopathy, the production of chemical compounds specifically designed to harm competing plants. Unlike the toxins that plants produce to defend themselves against herbivores, allelopathic compounds are offensive weapons, chemical sabotage designed to give one plant an advantage over its neighbors. Perhaps no plant demonstrates the power of allelopathy more dramatically than the black walnut tree. If you've ever wondered why the ground beneath black walnut trees often seems strangely bare, why grass struggles to grow there, and why gardeners complain about trying to plant anything in their vicinity, you're witnessing one of nature's most effective examples of chemical warfare. Black walnut trees produce a compound called juglone, a chemical so toxic to other plants that it creates what botanists call an exclusion zone around each tree. This isn't just a minor competitive advantage, it's botanical scorched earth policy. The tree literally poisons the soil around itself, creating a dead zone where few other plants can survive. Juglone interferes with cellular respiration in susceptible plants, essentially suffocating them at the molecular level. Plants that try to grow within the black walnut's chemical territory find themselves unable to produce energy efficiently. They wilt, yellow, and eventually die, not from disease or pest attack, but from chemical poisoning administered through their own root systems. The black walnut doesn't just dump juglone randomly into the soil. The tree carefully controls the concentration and distribution of its chemical weapon, producing more juglone when it detects the presence of competing plants, and focusing the highest concentrations in areas where competition is most intense. It's precision chemical warfare, targeted and strategic. But juglone is just one example of thousands of allelopathic compounds that plants use to wage chemical war through the soil. Sunflowers produce chemicals that inhibit the germination of grass seeds. Eucalyptus trees release compounds that prevent other trees from establishing themselves nearby. Even humble weeds like mugwort produce allelopathic chemicals that give them advantages in disturbed soils. The sophistication of these chemical weapon systems is remarkable. Some plants produce different allelopathic compounds for different types of competitors. One chemical to suppress grasses, another to inhibit shrubs, a third to prevent other trees from germinating. Others produce cocktails of compounds that work synergistically, each chemical amplifying the effects of the others. Root exudates, the chemicals that plants release through their roots, serve as both weapons and territorial markers. A plant can effectively claim ownership of a patch of soil by saturating it with its signature blend of allelopathic compounds. Other plants that encounter these chemical signatures know they're entering hostile territory. The monarch caterpillar not only tolerates these toxins, it actively concentrates them in its body tissues. As it feeds, specialized cells in its gut identify cardenolide molecules and transport them not to the waste system for elimination, but to storage areas throughout the caterpillar's body. The caterpillar is essentially turning itself into a living poison capsule. When the caterpillar pupates and emerges as an adult butterfly, those stored toxins come with it. An adult monarch butterfly contains enough cardenolides to kill a small bird, and its bright orange and black coloration serves as a warning to potential predators. I am beautiful, but I am dangerous. I am dangerous because of what I ate. This warning coloration is one of nature's most honest advertisements. A bird that tries to eat a monarch butterfly will experience violent nausea, heart palpitations, and vomiting, if it's lucky. The toxins that the caterpillar so carefully collected from milkweed plants become the adult butterfly's insurance policy against predation. But here's what makes this strategy so elegant. The monarch hasn't just evolved resistance to plant toxins, it has evolved the ability to weaponize them. The butterfly is essentially a flying advertisement for the power of chemical warfare, turned from victim into predator by the simple act of learning to eat poison. The specificity of this relationship is remarkable. Monarch caterpillars can eat milkweed that would kill other caterpillars, but they cannot eat many plants that other caterpillars find perfectly palatable. They have traded dietary flexibility for access to a food source that comes with built-in chemical armor. And like the koala, the monarch's adaptation required changes throughout its entire physiology. Monarch caterpillars have modified sodium-potassium pumps in their cells that are resistant to cardenolide interference. They have specialized transport proteins that can move these toxins around their bodies without being harmed by them. They have even evolved behaviors that maximize their toxin intake. Monarch caterpillars preferentially feed on the most toxic parts of milkweed plants, seeking out the flowers and seeds where cardenolide concentrations are highest. But not all animals have evolved such extreme dietary specializations. For most herbivores, the challenge isn't learning to eat one type of toxic plant, but learning to eat many different plants without being poisoned by any of them. This is where the liver comes in. One of evolution's most underappreciated organs, and perhaps the most important battlefield in the ongoing war between plants and animals. Your liver, right now, is working as a sophisticated chemical processing plant. Every minute of every day, it's identifying foreign compounds in your bloodstream, determining whether they're harmless or potentially dangerous, and either allowing them to circulate freely or capturing them for modification or elimination. The liver's primary weapons in this chemical warfare are a family of enzymes called cytochrome P450. These remarkable proteins are essentially molecular Swiss Army knives, capable of recognizing and modifying thousands of different chemical compounds. When you eat a plant that contains alkaloids, tannins, or any other defensive compound, it's your cytochrome P450 enzymes that determine whether that compound will make you sick or simply pass harmlessly through your system. Different animals have different versions of these enzymes, and this is why some animals can eat plants that would poison others. A rabbit's liver contains cytochrome P450 variants that are particularly good at processing the alkaloids found in many common plants. A horse's liver has enzymes that can handle the tannins in oak leaves, at least in small quantities. A goat's liver is so efficient at detoxification that goats can eat plants that would kill sheep. The diversity of cytochrome P450 enzymes across different animal species represents millions of years of evolutionary pressure from plant toxins. Each enzyme variant represents a molecular solution to a specific chemical challenge posed by the plant world. Animals with more diverse and efficient detoxification systems can eat a wider variety of plants, giving them access to more food sources and better nutrition. But even the most sophisticated liver has its limits, and this is where behavior becomes crucial. Most herbivores don't rely solely on their detoxification systems to handle plant toxins. They also employ sophisticated behavioral strategies to minimize their exposure to dangerous compounds. One of the most widespread of these strategies is geophagy, the deliberate consumption of clay. If you've ever wondered why you sometimes see animals eating dirt, you're witnessing one of nature's oldest pharmaceutical practices. Certain types of clay have remarkable properties when it comes to neutralizing plant toxins. The microscopic structure of clay particles allows them to bind to alkaloids, tannins, and other defensive compounds, essentially wrapping them up and preventing them from being absorbed into the animal's bloodstream. Animals that regularly consume clay can tolerate much higher levels of plant toxins than animals that don't. This isn't just instinctual behavior, it's learned pharmaceutical practice passed down through generations. Mother elephants teach their calves which clay deposits are safe to eat. Macaque monkeys have specific clay-eating sites that they visit regularly, especially during seasons when their preferred foods are highest in toxins. Even domestic animals will seek out clay when they're suffering from plant poisoning, suggesting that this behavior is deeply ingrained in mammalian biology. But clay eating is just one of many behavioral adaptations that animals use to deal with plant chemical warfare. Perhaps even more important is the strategy of dietary mixing, the practice of eating many different plant species rather than specializing on just one or a few. This might seem counterintuitive. If a plant is toxic, why not just avoid it entirely and eat only safe plants? The answer lies in the complex mathematics of toxin tolerance. Most plant toxins become dangerous only when they accumulate to high levels in an animal's system. By eating small amounts of many different toxic plants rather than large amounts of a few, an herbivore can access a wide variety of nutrients while keeping the concentration of any single toxin below dangerous levels. Think of it like this. If you had to drink a variety of mildly poisonous beverages to survive, you'd be much safer drinking a sip of each rather than a full glass of any one of them. Your detoxification systems could handle small amounts of multiple toxins much more easily than large amounts of a single toxin. This strategy requires sophisticated knowledge about which plants are safe to eat, in what quantities, and in what combinations. For most herbivores, this knowledge isn't instinctual. It's learned, often through a complex process of social learning that begins in infancy. Watch a mother herbivore with her young, and you're witnessing one of nature's most important educational processes. The mother doesn't just lead her offspring to food, she actively teaches them what to eat, how much to eat, and what to avoid. A young deer learns which plants are safe by watching its mother's feeding choices and mimicking them. A young elephant learns which clay deposits provide the best protection against plant toxins by following its mother to traditional clay-eating sites. This process of learning can take months or even years. Young animals often make mistakes, eating plants that make them sick, and learning from these experiences. Some species have evolved specific behaviors to help young animals learn safely. Mother rats, for example, will vomit if they eat something toxic, and the smell of their vomit teaches their offspring to avoid that food in the future. The complexity of this learned behavior helps explain why herbivores that are raised in captivity often have difficulty surviving in the wild. It's not just that they don't know how to find food, they don't know how to eat safely. They lack the detailed knowledge of plant toxicity and detoxification strategies that wild animals acquire through years of social learning. As we contemplate this ongoing dance of adaptation between plants and animals, we're witnessing one of evolution's most persistent themes: the transformation of conflict into cooperation, the turning of weapons into tools, the conversion of poisons into nutrients. The koala didn't just evolve resistance to eucalyptus toxins, it evolved a partnership with bacteria that could transform those toxins into food. The monarch butterfly didn't just learn to tolerate milkweed poisons, it learned to use them as armor. Herbivores didn't just develop better detoxification systems, they developed complex behavioral strategies that allow them to safely navigate a world full of chemical weapons. Each of these adaptations represents millions of years of evolutionary pressure, countless generations of animals that lived or died based on their ability to handle plant chemical warfare. The survivors are the ones whose descendants we see today, animals that have not just adapted to a world full of toxic plants, but have learned to thrive in it. This is the beautiful paradox of the plant-animal war. It has created not just better weapons, but better defenses, better cooperation, and better ways of turning conflict into mutualism. The same evolutionary pressure that drives plants to produce more sophisticated toxins also drives animals to develop more sophisticated ways of handling those toxins, and sometimes even turning them to their own advantage. The war continues, but it's a war that creates rather than destroys. A conflict that builds complexity rather than reducing it. A struggle that ultimately benefits both sides by pushing them toward greater and greater heights of biological sophistication. In this ancient dance of adaptation, both plants and animals become more than they could be alone, more chemically sophisticated, more behaviorally complex, more intricately connected to the web of life that surrounds them. The herbivore's response to plant chemical warfare isn't just resistance, it's transformation, both of themselves and of the very nature of the conflict they're engaged in. In the thorny scrublands of Central America, there stands a tree that has solved the ancient problem of being rooted in place and vulnerable to attack. the bull's horn acacia doesn't just defend itself with chemical weapons, it has recruited an army. Look closely at this tree, and you'll notice something peculiar about its thorns. Unlike the solid, sharp spikes that most plants use to discourage browsers, the bull's horn acacia's thorns are hollow, swollen at the base, and carefully sculpted into what can only be described as tiny apartments. Each thorn has been modified through millions of years of evolution to serve as living quarters for one of nature's most effective security forces, ants. These aren't just any ants, they're pseudomyrmex ants, a species that has co-evolved so closely with bull's horn acacias that they literally cannot survive without each other. The ants live their entire lives on the tree, raise their young in the hollow thorns, and dedicate themselves completely to defending their botanical host from any creature that dares to threaten it. The arrangement is elegantly simple. The tree provides housing and food, and the ants provide security services that would make a professional bodyguard jealous. But the sophistication of this partnership goes far beyond simple room and board. The acacia tree has modified not just its thorns, but its entire biology to support its ant army. At the tips of its leaflets, the tree produces specialized structures called Beltian bodies, protein-rich packages that serve as ant food. These aren't leftovers or waste products. They're carefully manufactured nutritional supplements, produced specifically to feed the tree's protectors. The tree also produces extrafloral nectaries, essentially ant bars that serve sugary drinks around the clock. The ants, for their part, have become professional plant bodyguards. They patrol the tree's branches 24 hours a day, attacking anything that touches the plant. They bite herbivorous insects, sting larger animals, and even clear away competing vegetation from around the tree's base. They're so aggressive in their defense that they'll attack human researchers who get too close to their tree. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this partnership is the communication system that has evolved between plant and protector. When the tree is damaged, when a caterpillar starts chewing on a leaf, for instance, it releases specific chemical signals that alert the ants to danger. These aren't just general alarm signals, they're detailed chemical messages that tell the ants exactly what kind of threat they're facing and where to find it. The tree can distinguish between different types of damage and produce different chemical calls for help. The signal for caterpillar attack is different from the signal for large herbivore browsing, which is different from the signal for competing plant growing too close. The ants have learned to interpret these chemical messages and respond appropriately, sending the right kind of defensive force to deal with each specific threat. This level of chemical communication required millions of years of co-evolution to develop. The tree had to evolve the ability to produce specific chemical signals for different types of damage. The ants had to evolve the ability to detect these signals and interpret their meaning. Both species had to develop the neural and behavioral machinery to coordinate their responses. The result is a partnership so intimate that the tree and its ants function almost like a single organism, a plant with an animal nervous system capable of responding to threats with a speed and precision that would be impossible for either species alone. But the acacia ant partnership is just one example of a much broader phenomenon in the plant world: indirect defense. While some plants recruit permanent animal bodyguards, others have evolved the ability to call for help when they need it, summoning temporary allies to deal with specific threats. Consider what happens when a caterpillar starts feeding on a lima bean plant. The plant doesn't just passively endure the attack, it immediately begins producing a complex cocktail of airborne chemicals. These volatile compounds drift away from the damaged plant like an invisible distress signal, advertising the presence of herbivorous insects to anyone who might be interested in hunting them. And someone is very interested indeed. Predatory mites, wasps, and other hunters of herbivorous insects have evolved to recognize these chemical SOS signals. When they detect the specific blend of compounds that indicates caterpillar feeding on lima bean, they come running, or flying, or crawling, ready to hunt. The lima bean is essentially broadcasting a want ad. Caterpillars available here, fresh, juicy, and feeding actively. Predators welcome. The predators that respond to this chemical advertisement get a meal, and the plant gets rid of the herbivores that were eating it. Everyone wins, except the caterpillars. What makes this system so sophisticated is its specificity. The lima bean doesn't just release a generic "help me" signal. It produces different chemical blends depending on what's attacking it, effectively providing detailed information about the hunting opportunities available. The chemical signature of caterpillar damage is different from the signature of aphid damage, which is different from the signature of spider mite damage. Predators can use this information to determine whether the hunting is worth their while. Even more remarkably, plants can sometimes identify the specific species of herbivore that's attacking them and tailor their chemical signals accordingly. A corn plant can distinguish between caterpillars of different moth species and release chemical blends that specifically attract the natural enemies of whichever species is currently doing the damage. This is chemical communication at a level of sophistication that rivals human language. The plant is not just saying help, it's saying I'm being attacked by species X in location Y, and there are Z individuals present. The predators that respond can use this information to plan their hunting strategies and determine how much effort to invest in responding to the call. But the world of plant-animal alliances isn't all noble cooperation and mutual benefit. Like human military alliances, these partnerships can involve deception, exploitation, and betrayal. Some plant-ant relationships that appear to be mutually beneficial are actually cases of botanical slavery. Certain species of cecropia trees produce housing and food for their ant partners, just like the acacias we discussed earlier. But these trees have also evolved chemical compounds that alter their ants' behavior in disturbing ways. The cecropia tree produces substances that make its ant partners less capable of surviving away from the tree. The ants become chemically dependent on their host, unable to establish colonies elsewhere or switch to different food sources. The tree has essentially addicted its protectors to its chemical products, ensuring their loyalty through dependency rather than mutual benefit. Even more sinister are the plants that produce compounds that interfere with their ants' reproductive systems. Some trees ensure their ant partners' loyalty by reducing their ability to reproduce successfully, forcing them to invest all their energy in defending the tree rather than establishing their own independent colonies. These manipulative relationships raise fascinating questions about the nature of mutualism and exploitation in the natural world. When does a beneficial partnership cross the line into slavery? How do we distinguish between cooperation and coercion when both partners have been shaped by millions of years of coevolution? The answer may be that the distinction is largely meaningless from an evolutionary perspective. What matters is not whether the relationship seems fair by human standards, but whether it increases the reproductive success of both species. A plant-ant partnership that involves chemical manipulation might still be beneficial to the ants if it provides them with resources and protection that they couldn't obtain elsewhere, even if it also limits their freedom. But perhaps nowhere is the complexity of plant-animal relationships more apparent than in the world of pollination, where cooperation and competition, mutualism and exploitation play out in an endless dance of evolutionary one-upmanship. Plants need pollinators to reproduce, and pollinators need plants for food. This should be a straightforward mutualistic relationship. Plants provide nectar and pollen, and animals provide pollination services. But the reality is far more complex and often far more devious. Plants are engaged in constant competition for the services of pollinators. There are only so many bees, butterflies, and other pollinators in any given area, and every plant wants their exclusive attention. This has led to an evolutionary arms race in which plants try to outcompete each other for pollinator services using every trick in the book. Some plants offer better rewards, more nectar, more nutritious pollen, or easier access to these resources. Others use advertising, brighter colors, stronger scents, or more conspicuous displays. Still, others resort to what can only be described as false advertising, producing signals that promise rewards they don't actually deliver. But some plants have gone beyond simple competition into the realm of chemical warfare against their competitors. Certain species produce compounds in their nectar that are mildly toxic to pollinators, not toxic enough to kill them, but toxic enough to make them sluggish and less efficient at visiting other flowers. The plant is essentially drugging its pollinators, slowing them down so they'll spend more time working on its flowers and less time visiting its competitors. It's a strategy that walks a fine line. Too much toxin, and the pollinators will avoid the plant entirely. Too little, and the competitive advantage disappears. Rhododendrons are masters of this strategy. Their nectar contains compounds called grayanotoxins that have mild psychoactive effects on bees. Bees that drink rhododendron nectar become somewhat intoxicated. They fly more slowly, have trouble navigating, and tend to stay longer on each flower they visit. From the rhododendron's perspective, this is perfect. The bees are more likely to pick up pollen and less likely to fly off to visit competing plants. But the true masters of pollinator manipulation are the orchids, a family that has elevated deception to an art form. Many orchid species produce no nectar rewards at all, instead relying on elaborate deceptions to trick pollinators into visiting their flowers. Some orchids mimic the appearance and scent of female insects, luring male insects to attempt copulation with their flowers. The frustrated males end up covered in pollen, which they inadvertently transfer to the next orchid they attempt to mate with. The orchids get pollination services for free, while the male insects get nothing but sexual frustration. Other orchids mimic the alarm pheromones that insects release when they're being attacked, causing potential pollinators to investigate what they think is a fellow insect in distress. Still, others produce scents that mimic rotting meat, attracting flies that are looking for places to lay their eggs. Perhaps the most elaborate orchid deception involves species that mimic other, more rewarding flowers. These orchids produce visual and chemical signals that are nearly identical to those of nectar-rich flowers that bloom at the same time. Pollinators that have learned to associate these signals with a good meal end up visiting the deceptive orchids, only to find no reward waiting for them. The sophistication of these deceptions is remarkable. Some orchids can mimic not just the general appearance of their models, but specific details like the pattern of nectar guides or the exact chemical composition of attractive scents. The evolutionary pressure to create convincing deceptions has driven some orchids to levels of mimicry that would impress a master forger. But deception is a dangerous game. Pollinators can learn to avoid flowers that don't provide expected rewards, and orchids that rely too heavily on deception may find themselves without any pollinators at all. This has led to an ongoing evolutionary arms race between deceptive plants and increasingly sophisticated pollinators who are better at detecting and avoiding scams. The result is a pollination landscape that resembles nothing so much as a marketplace full of honest merchants, skilled advertisers, and outright con artists, all competing for the attention of increasingly savvy customers. Some plants offer genuine value for the services they receive. Others rely on flashy marketing to attract customers to mediocre products. Still others are running elaborate confidence games, hoping to fool enough customers to stay in business. And just as in human marketplaces, the most successful strategies often involve some combination of genuine value, skilled presentation, and just enough deception to gain an edge over the competition. The plants that thrive are those that can navigate this complex landscape of cooperation and competition, mutualism and exploitation, honest signaling and elaborate deception. The world of plant-animal alliances reveals the fundamental complexity of life on Earth. What appears to be simple cooperation often involves layers of manipulation, exploitation, and evolutionary arms racing. What seems like obvious mutualism may actually be elaborate parasitism in disguise. And what looks like betrayal may actually be the most stable form of cooperation available under the circumstances. These relationships remind us that evolution doesn't create perfect solutions or fair partnerships. It creates whatever works, whatever increases reproductive success, whatever allows species to survive and thrive in a competitive world. The result is a natural world that is far more complex, far more devious, and far more fascinating than simple narratives of cooperation and competition would suggest. In the end, the alliances and betrayals we see in plant-animal relationships reflect the same kinds of complex social and economic relationships that characterize human societies. There are honest traders and skilled negotiators, generous partners and ruthless exploiters, loyal allies and opportunistic betrayers. The main difference is that in the plant world, these relationships have been shaped by millions of years of evolution rather than thousands of years of culture. But the underlying dynamics are remarkably similar. The tension between cooperation and competition, the challenge of building trust in a world full of cheaters, the constant pressure to evolve better strategies for getting what you need while giving as little as possible in return. The plant world, it turns out, is not so different from our own. Beneath your feet, as you sit listening to this, lies a world of warfare that makes the conflicts we see above ground seem almost quaint by comparison. If you could shrink yourself down and journey into the soil, you would find yourself in a landscape that resembles nothing so much as a chemical battlefield, where plants wage war not with visible weapons, but with invisible poisons seeping through the darkness. Most of us think of soil as empty space between plant roots, a passive medium that simply holds plants in place and provides them with water and nutrients. But soil is actually one of the most complex and competitive environments on Earth, a three-dimensional arena where plants fight for territory, resources, and survival using strategies that would make a military strategist envious. The weapon of choice in this underground war is allelopathy, the production of chemical compounds specifically designed to harm competing plants. Unlike the toxins that plants produce to defend themselves against herbivores, allelopathic compounds are offensive weapons, chemical sabotage designed to give one plant an advantage over its neighbors. Perhaps no plant demonstrates the power of allelopathy more dramatically than the black walnut tree. If you've ever wondered why the ground beneath black walnut trees often seems strangely bare, why grass struggles to grow there, and why gardeners complain about trying to plant anything in their vicinity, you're witnessing one of nature's most effective examples of chemical warfare. Black walnut trees produce a compound called juglone, a chemical so toxic to other plants that it creates what botanists call an exclusion zone around each tree. This isn't just a minor competitive advantage, it's botanical scorched earth policy. The tree literally poisons the soil around itself, creating a dead zone where few other plants can survive. Juglone interferes with cellular respiration in susceptible plants, essentially suffocating them at the molecular level. Plants that try to grow within the black walnut's chemical territory find themselves unable to produce energy efficiently. They wilt, yellow, and eventually die, not from disease or pest attack, but from chemical poisoning administered through their own root systems. The black walnut doesn't just dump juglone randomly into the soil. The tree carefully controls the concentration and distribution of its chemical weapon, producing more juglone when it detects the presence of competing plants and focusing the highest concentrations in areas where competition is most intense. It's precision chemical warfare, targeted and strategic. But juglone is just one example of thousands of allelopathic compounds that plants use to wage chemical war through the soil. Sunflowers produce chemicals that inhibit the germination of grass seeds. Eucalyptus trees release compounds that prevent other trees from establishing themselves nearby. Even humble weeds like mugwort produce allelopathic chemicals that give them advantages in disturbed soils. The sophistication of these chemical weapon systems is remarkable. Some plants produce different allelopathic compounds for different types of competitors. One chemical to suppress grasses, another to inhibit shrubs, a third to prevent other trees from germinating. Others produce cocktails of compounds that work synergistically, each chemical amplifying the effects of the others. Root exudates, the chemicals that plants release through their roots, serve as both weapons and territorial markers. A plant can effectively claim ownership of a patch of soil by saturating it with its signature blend of allelopathic compounds. Other plants that encounter these chemical signatures know they're entering hostile territory, but the underground world of plant competition involves more than just chemical warfare between individual plants. Beneath the forest floor lies one of the most sophisticated communication networks on Earth, a web of fungal connections that botanists have dubbed the Wood Wide Web, or the mycorrhizal internet. Most plants form partnerships with soil fungi called mycorrhizae, literally fungus roots. These fungi extend the reach of plant root systems by orders of magnitude, creating vast underground networks that can connect dozens or even hundreds of plants across miles of forest floor. What was once thought to be simple nutrient exchange has turned out to be something far more complex. A biological internet that allows plants to share information, resources, and even warnings about threats. Through these fungal networks, plants can communicate about insect attacks, drought, stress, and other environmental challenges. When a tree is attacked by caterpillars, it can send chemical signals through the mycorrhizal network to warn its neighbors, allowing them to begin producing defensive compounds before the insects reach them. It's an early warning system that spans entire forests. The mycorrhizal internet also allows plants to share resources in ways that were once thought impossible. A large, mature tree can send nutrients to smaller plants that are struggling in its shade. Parent trees can provide support to their offspring, even after the young trees are physically separated from them. Different species can trade resources. A tree that's good at gathering phosphorus might trade it to a shrub that's efficient at collecting nitrogen. But like any communication network, the mycorrhizal internet can be hacked. Some plants have evolved to tap into these fungal networks without contributing much in return, essentially becoming biological freeloaders. Others use the network to spread allelopathic compounds more widely, turning the forest's communication system into a distribution network for chemical weapons. The competition below ground isn't just about chemical warfare and information sharing, it's also about the most basic resource of all: nutrients. Soil contains finite amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other elements that plants need to survive, and the competition for these resources drives some of the most sophisticated adaptations in the plant kingdom. Different plants have evolved radically different strategies for competing in this underground resource race. Some plants are sprinters. They produce fine, fast-growing roots that can quickly colonize patches of nutrient-rich soil. These roots are cheap to build but don't last long, and they're designed for rapid exploitation of temporary resource bonanzas. Other plants are marathoners. They invest in thick, long-lived roots that can persist for years or even decades, slowly and steadily extracting nutrients from poor soils. These roots are expensive to build and maintain, but they give plants access to resources that faster competitors can't reach. Some plants have evolved root systems that are essentially underground armies, producing thousands of fine root tips that can explore every cubic centimeter of soil in their territory. Others focus their root growth in specific directions, sending long exploratory roots toward patches of soil that their chemical sensors have identified as nutrient-rich. The timing of root growth is just as important as its form. Plants that can get their roots active early in the spring, before their competitors have broken dormancy, can claim the best soil territories before anyone else even starts competing. Others wait until late in the season, when early competitors have depleted the easily available nutrients, and then deploy specialized root systems designed to extract resources that other plants have left behind. Root architecture is one of the most variable features in the plant kingdom, with different species evolving radically different approaches to the same basic challenge: how to extract maximum resources from a limited and competitive environment. Some plants produce shallow, spreading root systems that can quickly capture nutrients from rainfall. Others send deep taproots into the subsoil, accessing water and minerals that shallow-rooted competitors can't reach. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of underground plant competition involves the manipulation of soil microbial communities. Plants don't just passively extract nutrients from soil, they actively manage the microbial ecosystems around their roots, recruiting beneficial bacteria and fungi while suppressing harmful ones. The rhizosphere, the zone of soil directly influenced by plant roots, is essentially a plant's extended phenotype, as much a part of the plant as its leaves or stems. In this zone, plants invest enormous amounts of energy in producing root exudates that feed and manage microbial communities. Up to 30% of all the carbon that a plant fixes through photosynthesis may be invested in rhizosphere management. Plants use root exudates like a pharmaceutical company uses research and development funding, constantly testing new chemical compounds and refining old ones to create the optimal microbial environment for their survival. They produce compounds that attract beneficial nitrogen-fixing bacteria, chemicals that stimulate the growth of phosphorus-solubilizing fungi, and toxins that suppress plant pathogens. Different plants manage their rhizosphere communities in radically different ways. Legumes like beans and peas have evolved elaborate chemical communication systems that allow them to negotiate partnerships with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. The plants provide the bacteria with carbon compounds and specialized root nodules to live in, and the bacteria provide the plants with nitrogen in a form they can use. These negotiations are remarkably sophisticated. The plant can sense how much nitrogen different bacterial strains are providing and adjust its carbon payments accordingly, rewarding productive partners and punishing cheaters. The bacteria, for their part, can assess the quality of different plant hosts and invest more effort in partnerships that provide better resources. Mycorrhizal fungi engage in even more complex negotiations with their plant partners. These fungi can simultaneously connect to multiple plant species, creating markets where different plants can trade different types of nutrients. A fungus might collect phosphorus from one plant and nitrogen from another. then distribute these resources based on what each plant is willing to pay in carbon compounds. The result is a soil economy of remarkable complexity, where plants, bacteria, and fungi engage in constant negotiations over resource exchange, territory rights, and partnership terms. It's an economy based not on money, but on chemical currencies, carbon compounds, nitrogen molecules, phosphorus atoms, and hundreds of other molecular tokens of value. This underground economy is also subject to market manipulation and economic warfare. Some plants produce compounds that interfere with the partnerships between their competitors and beneficial microbes, essentially sabotaging their rivals' supply chains. Others flood the soil market with cheap carbon compounds, driving down prices and making it harder for their competitors to secure good deals with microbial partners. Parasitic plants take this economic warfare to its logical extreme, tapping directly into other plants' root systems and stealing the resources they've worked to accumulate. These botanical bank robbers bypass the soil economy entirely, going straight to the source and helping themselves to whatever they need. The complexity of these underground interactions challenges our basic assumptions about how plant communities work. What appears above ground to be a peaceful forest or meadow is actually the visible manifestation of an incredibly complex underground economy, where plants are constantly negotiating, competing, and collaborating in ways that determine the structure and function of entire ecosystems. The soil beneath any patch of vegetation is alive with chemical signals, resource flows, and competitive interactions. Root tips probe the darkness like blind fingers, seeking nutrients and sensing competitors. Fungal networks pulse with chemical messages, carrying information about threats and opportunities across vast distances. Bacterial communities rise and fall in response to the chemical incentives provided by their plant partners. It's a world that operates on scales of time and space that are difficult for humans to comprehend. Chemical signals may take hours or days to travel through soil networks. Competitive interactions may play out over seasons or years. The consequences of today's root growth patterns may not become apparent until decades from now. Yet this hidden world of root wars and soil secrets is just as important to the structure of plant communities as the more visible interactions we see above ground. The plants that succeed in any given environment are often those that are most effective at managing their underground territories, recruiting beneficial microbes, and outcompeting their rivals for soil resources. Understanding this underground dimension of plant competition helps explain many patterns that are otherwise mysterious. Why do certain plants always seem to grow together, while others never do? Why do some invasive species spread so rapidly, while others struggle to establish themselves? Why do forests have such predictable structures, with different species occupying different layers and positions? The answers often lie not in what we can see above ground, but in the complex web of chemical interactions, resource flows, and competitive relationships that play out in the darkness below our feet. The soil, it turns out, is not empty space, but a complex battleground where the real drama of plant competition unfolds, hidden from view, but fundamental to everything we see growing in the light above. In this underground world, plants reveal themselves to be far more active, far more social, and far more strategically sophisticated than their stationary appearance would suggest. They are not passive victims of their environment, but active agents that shape their surroundings, manipulate their competitors, and manage complex relationships with an invisible world of microbial partners. The root wars and soil secrets that play out beneath our feet remind us that the natural world is far more complex and interconnected than it appears on the surface. Every plant is embedded in networks of chemical communication, resource exchange, and competitive interaction that span vast distances and operate on multiple scales of time and space. This hidden dimension of plant life adds yet another layer to our understanding of the ancient war between plants and animals, revealing that plants are not just sophisticated chemists and master strategists, but also accomplished network builders, resource managers, and ecosystem engineers whose influence extends far beyond their visible boundaries. Imagine, if you will, a race where the finish line keeps moving. Every time you think you're about to win, your opponent gets faster, forcing you to run harder just to keep up. Now imagine that this race has been going on not for minutes or hours, but for millions of years, with the stakes being nothing less than survival itself. This is the Red Queen's race, named after Lewis Carroll's character who told Alice that it takes all the running you can do, to keep in the same place. In the world of plants and herbivores, this metaphor captures one of evolution's most relentless dynamics, the endless cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation that drives species to become ever more sophisticated in their offensive and defensive capabilities. The Red Queen's race explains why plants can never simply evolve the perfect toxin and call it a day, and why herbivores can never develop ultimate resistance and retire from the evolutionary battlefield. Every advance by one side creates selection pressure for advancement by the other side. Every new weapon demands a new defense. Every improved defense requires a more powerful weapon. This is not a war that can be won in any conventional sense. It's a war that creates its own momentum, driving both sides toward levels of complexity and specialization that would be impossible to achieve through any other evolutionary pathway. Consider the escalating toxin arms race that we see in many plant families. Wild potatoes, the ancestors of our familiar garden vegetables, produce glycoalkaloids, bitter, toxic compounds that can kill herbivorous insects and make larger animals seriously ill. But over time, some herbivores evolved the ability to tolerate these toxins. In response, the plants escalated, producing higher concentrations of glycoalkaloids and developing new, more potent variants. The Colorado potato beetle, one of the most destructive agricultural pests in North America, represents the herbivore side of this arms race. This beetle has evolved such sophisticated detoxification systems that it can not only survive on wild potatoes, but actually prefers them to many other plants. Its larvae can consume potato leaves that would kill other insects, and adults can survive toxin concentrations that would be lethal to their closest relatives. But the potato plants haven't given up. Wild varieties continue to evolve new glycoalkaloid compounds, some of which can overwhelm even the Colorado potato beetle's impressive detoxification systems. The result is a chemical arms race that has been escalating for millions of years, with no end in sight. The metabolic cost of this arms race is staggering. Plants may invest 10% or more of their total energy budget in producing toxins. Herbivores may dedicate similar amounts of energy to detoxification systems, specialized digestive processes, and the cellular machinery needed to handle toxic diets. Both sides are locked in an expensive competition that drains resources that could otherwise be used for growth, reproduction, or other activities. Yet neither side can afford to disarm unilaterally. A plant that stopped producing toxins would be overwhelmed by herbivores. An herbivore that lost its detoxification abilities would starve in a world full of toxic plants. The Red Queen's race forces both sides to keep running, to keep investing in their competitive abilities, regardless of the cost. But nowhere is this dynamic more beautifully illustrated than in the epic 50-million-year conflict between passion vines and heliconius butterflies in the Amazon rainforest. This is coevolution's masterpiece, a showcase of escalation, counter-escalation, and evolutionary creativity that reads like a spy novel written by natural selection. Passion vines are climbing plants that produce some of the most sophisticated chemical defenses in the plant kingdom. Their leaves contain cyanogenic glycosides, compounds that release deadly hydrogen cyanide when the plant tissue is damaged. It's chemical warfare at its most elegant. The plant stores the components of poison gas separately in its tissues, and when an herbivore bites down, the damage brings these components together, creating a cloud of toxic gas right in the herbivore's mouth. For most insects, passion vine leaves might as well be labeled with skull and crossbones. But heliconius butterflies have not only learned to tolerate these toxins, they've built their entire life cycle around them. Heliconius caterpillars feed exclusively on passion vines, processing the cyanogenic compounds and sequestering them for their own defense, just like monarch butterflies do with milkweed toxins. This created the first level of escalation. Passion vines evolved more potent toxins, and heliconius butterflies evolved better detoxification systems. But the arms race was just getting started. The butterflies evolved increasingly sophisticated ways of finding passion vines. Female heliconius butterflies became expert botanists, able to identify suitable host plants from remarkable distances using visual cues, chemical signals, and even the texture of leaves felt through their feet. They developed search images so precise that they can distinguish between closely related passion vine species that look virtually identical to human eyes. The passion vines responded with deception. Some species evolved leaves that mimic other, less palatable plants. Others developed what botanists call enemy specification, producing different toxin cocktails in different parts of their range, essentially creating locally adapted chemical defenses that target the specific heliconius populations in each area. But perhaps the most remarkable escalation came when passion vines began to engage in what can only be described as information warfare. Some passion vine species evolved fake egg spots, small, yellow bumps on their leaves that perfectly mimic heliconius butterfly eggs. When a female butterfly approaches a leaf that already appears to have eggs on it, she flies away, not wanting her offspring to face competition from caterpillars that are already established. The precision of this deception is extraordinary. The fake eggs are exactly the right size, color, and texture to fool butterfly mothers. They appear in exactly the places where real eggs would be laid. Some passion vines even produce fake eggs that match the specific egg characteristics of their local heliconius populations. Yellow spots in areas where butterflies lay yellow eggs, orange spots where they lay orange eggs. The butterflies, not to be outdone, evolved counterintelligence capabilities. Some heliconius females developed the ability to distinguish between real and fake eggs, learning to ignore the plant's deceptive signals. Others evolved more sophisticated egg-laying behaviors, searching more carefully for suitable sites and even removing competitor eggs when they find them. The result is an evolutionary spy game that has been playing out for 50 million years, with each side developing ever more sophisticated techniques for deception and detection. Passion vines produce fake butterfly eggs, ant mimics that discourage egg laying, and even false damage signals that make healthy leaves appear to be already under attack. Heliconius butterflies respond with better sensory systems, more careful host plant evaluation, and increasingly complex behavioral strategies for finding suitable egg-laying sites. The genetic machinery underlying these arms races reveals evolution's remarkable capacity for innovation under pressure. When plants face sustained herbivore pressure, they don't just gradually increase production of existing toxins, they rapidly evolve entirely new defensive compounds through a variety of genetic mechanisms. Gene duplication plays a crucial role in this process. When a gene that produces a useful defensive compound gets accidentally duplicated during reproduction, the plant suddenly has two copies of the same gene. One copy can continue producing the original compound, while the other copy is free to mutate and potentially develop new functions. This is how plants can rapidly evolve new toxins without losing the ability to produce toxins that are already working. Horizontal gene transfer, the direct movement of genes between different species, adds another dimension to chemical warfare evolution. Plants can literally steal defensive genes from other species, bypassing the slow process of developing new toxins through gradual mutation. Some plants have acquired toxin-producing genes from bacteria, fungi, or even other plants, giving them instant access to new chemical weapons. The speed of this evolutionary change can be breathtaking. Under intense selection pressure, plant populations can evolve significant changes in toxin production within just a few generations. Herbivore populations can evolve resistance to new plant toxins almost as quickly. The Red Queen's race operates on timescales that range from decades to geological epochs, with periods of rapid change punctuated by intervals of relative stability. But there's a dark side to this evolutionary dynamism. The same processes that drive rapid adaptation in arms races can also lead species into evolutionary dead ends, paths of specialization that ultimately prove unsustainable. Consider the case of extreme dietary specialization. Some herbivores have become so adapted to specific plant toxins that they've lost the ability to eat anything else. These species have essentially bet their entire evolutionary future on the continued existence of their host plants. If environmental change eliminates their host species, they face extinction. The koala, which we discussed earlier, represents this kind of evolutionary risk. Koalas are so specialized for eating eucalyptus that they cannot survive on any other diet. If climate change or habitat destruction eliminates eucalyptus forests, koalas will disappear with them. Their extreme specialization, which once gave them exclusive access to an abundant food resource, has become a vulnerability. Plants face similar risks from over-specialization. Some species have invested so heavily in producing specific toxins that they've become metabolically locked into these strategies. If their target herbivores disappear or evolve complete resistance, these plants may find themselves producing expensive toxins that no longer provide any benefit. The passenger pigeon's extinction illustrates how arms race dynamics can contribute to ecosystem collapse. These birds were specialist feeders on the nuts of American chestnut trees, and the trees had evolved defensive strategies specifically tailored to passenger pigeon feeding behavior. When the pigeons went extinct due to overhunting, the chestnuts lost their primary seed disperser. When the chestnuts succumbed to blight disease, an entire co-evolved system disappeared. Some extinct plants appear to have been victims of their own defensive success. Fossil evidence suggests that certain ancient plant species evolved toxins so effective that they eliminated their herbivores entirely. Without herbivore pressure to maintain their defensive systems, these plants may have lost their competitive edge against other plant species that were investing their energy in growth and reproduction rather than chemical warfare. The evolutionary graveyard is littered with species that became too specialized, too dependent on specific relationships, or too invested in arms races that ultimately led nowhere. These extinct species remind us that the Red Queen's race, for all its creative power, is also a high-stakes gamble where the penalties for misjudgment can be severe. Yet despite these risks, the Red Queen's race continues to drive some of the most remarkable innovations in the natural world. The pressure to stay ahead of competitors and enemies has produced defensive systems of almost unimaginable sophistication, offensive capabilities that rival anything in human warfare, and detection systems that surpass our best technology. The relationship between passion vines and heliconius butterflies continues to evolve today. Researchers studying these species in the Amazon regularly discover new defensive strategies, new methods of deception, and new forms of counter-adaptation. The 50 million year war shows no signs of ending, and both sides continue to develop new tactics and strategies. This ongoing evolution reminds us that the natural world is not a static museum of ancient adaptations, but a dynamic theater where new dramas are constantly unfolding. The arms races that we can observe today are just the latest chapters in stories that began millions of years ago and will continue for millions of years into the future. The Red Queen's race ensures that evolution never truly ends, that adaptation never reaches a final state of perfection, and that the war between plants and animals will continue as long as both sides exist. It's a race without winners, but also a race that never stops producing wonders, new forms of life, new solutions to old problems, and new demonstrations of nature's endless capacity for creativity under pressure. In this endless dance of escalation and counter-escalation, we see both the power and the peril of evolutionary arms races. They drive species to heights of sophistication that would be impossible to achieve through any other pathway, but they also create dependencies and specializations that can become traps. They generate diversity and complexity, but they also create winners and losers, survivors and casualties. The Red Queen's race is evolution's engine, the force that keeps the natural world dynamic and unpredictable. It ensures that no species can rest on its evolutionary laurels, that no adaptation is ever perfect enough to end the competitive pressure, and that the war between plants and animals will continue to produce new surprises for as long as life exists on Earth. 10,000 years ago, when our ancestors first began selecting seeds from wild grasses and saving them for planting, they unknowingly intervened in one of evolution's oldest conflicts. Without realizing it, early farmers became military strategists in the ancient war between plants and animals, fundamentally altering the rules of engagement that had governed this conflict for hundreds of millions of years. The story of agriculture is, in many ways, the story of humanity's systematic disarmament of the plant kingdom. When our ancestors chose to save seeds from the least bitter, least toxic, most palatable plants they could find, they began a process of selective breeding that would eventually strip our food crops of most of their natural defenses. Consider the wild ancestors of our modern vegetables. Wild cabbage is a bitter, tough plant loaded with glucosinolates, sulfur-containing compounds that give it a sharp, peppery taste and protect it from herbivorous insects. Wild carrots contain falcarinol and other polyacetylene compounds that can cause skin irritation and digestive upset. Wild potatoes are so loaded with glycoalkaloids that eating them can cause serious poisoning. Our ancestors didn't understand the chemistry behind these bitter, unpalatable flavors, but they understood that some individual plants tasted better than others. Generation after generation, they selected the mildest, sweetest, most pleasant-tasting specimens for their seeds. Without knowing it, they were systematically breeding the chemical weapons out of their food plants. The process of domestication essentially turned warrior plants into docile livestock. Modern cabbage produces only a fraction of the glucosinolates found in its wild relatives. Domestic carrots have been bred to minimize their natural toxins. Commercial potato varieties contain glycoalkaloid levels so low that we can eat them safely in large quantities. This domestication process created something unprecedented in natural history: plants that had voluntarily disarmed themselves, trading their chemical defenses for human protection and cultivation. It was an evolutionary bargain that worked brilliantly for both species. Humans got access to concentrated nutrition without the side effects of plant toxins, and domestic plants gained access to cultivation, protection, and global distribution that no wild plant could achieve. But this bargain came with hidden costs that we're only beginning to understand today. When we stripped the defensive compounds out of our food plants, we didn't just remove bitter flavors and toxic effects. We also removed many of the compounds that give plants their distinctive tastes, their nutritional complexity, and their health benefits. Wild plants taste intensely flavorful, partly because of their defensive compounds. The bitter notes in wild greens, the sharp bite of wild onions, the complex flavors of wild fruits. These sensory experiences come largely from the same chemicals that protect plants from herbivores. When we bred these compounds out of our crops, we created vegetables that were safer and milder, but also blander and nutritionally simpler. This helps explain why organic and conventional produce often taste different, and why heirloom varieties frequently have more intense flavors than modern commercial cultivars. Organic farming practices, which rely less heavily on synthetic pesticides, create environments where plants must maintain more of their natural defensive systems. Plants grown under organic conditions often produce higher levels of phenolic compounds, flavonoids, and other defensive chemicals that contribute to flavor complexity. Heirloom varieties, being closer to their wild ancestors, retain more of their original chemical defenses. That intense flavor of a Cherokee purple tomato or the sharp bite of an heirloom radish reflects the presence of defensive compounds that have been bred out of milder commercial varieties. The nutritional implications of this domestication process are profound. Many of the compounds that plants produce for defense, flavonoids, phenolic acids, glucosinolates, and others, turn out to have significant health benefits for humans. When we breed these compounds out of our food plants, we may be inadvertently reducing the nutritional value of our diet. But humanity's intervention in plant-animal warfare extends far beyond the domestication of crop plants. The development of synthetic pesticides in the 20th century represented an entirely new phase in this ancient conflict, the introduction of chemical weapons that had never existed in nature and against which neither plants nor animals had evolved any defenses. For a brief moment in agricultural history, it seemed like humanity had found a way to end the plant-animal war through superior firepower. DDT and other early pesticides were so effective against insects that many experts predicted the elimination of agricultural pests within a few decades. Herbicides promised to free crops from competition with weeds forever. But the ancient war was not so easily ended. Within years of the introduction of synthetic pesticides, the first resistant insects began to appear. The same evolutionary processes that had been driving arms races between plants and animals for hundreds of millions of years immediately began adapting to humanity's chemical interventions. The evolution of pesticide resistance follows predictable patterns that mirror the natural arms races we've explored throughout this series. A pesticide is introduced and proves highly effective against its target species. But in any large population of insects or weeds, a few individuals carry genetic variants that provide some level of resistance to the new chemical. These resistant individuals survive the pesticide treatment and reproduce, passing their resistance genes to their offspring. Within a few generations, the resistant trait spreads through the population. What once was a devastatingly effective pesticide becomes useless, and farmers must either increase application rates, switch to new chemicals, or watch their crops succumb to resurgent pest populations. The speed of this evolutionary response has surprised even experts who understood the basic principles involved. Some insect species have evolved significant resistance to new pesticides within just a few years of their introduction. Herbicide-resistant weeds can appear within a single growing season in areas where the same herbicide has been used repeatedly. The result is a technological arms race that parallels the biological arms races we see in nature. As insects and weeds evolve resistance to existing pesticides, chemical companies develop new formulations with different modes of action. But each new pesticide eventually selects for resistance, requiring the development of yet newer chemicals. This cycle has accelerated to the point where new pesticides now have shorter effective lifespans than ever before. Compounds that might have provided decades of effective pest control in the early days of synthetic pesticides now may lose their effectiveness within just a few years. The emergence of superbugs and superweeds represents the logical endpoint of this technological arms race. These are pest species that have evolved resistance not just to one or two pesticides, but to multiple chemical classes, sometimes including compounds they've never even been exposed to. Cross-resistance occurs when the same genetic mechanisms that provide resistance to one chemical also confer resistance to related compounds. Some weed species have now evolved resistance to virtually every class of herbicide available to farmers. Palmer amaranth, a particularly aggressive agricultural weed, has developed resistance to 5 different herbicide modes of action in some populations. These superweeds can grow up to 3 inches per day and produce hundreds of thousands of seeds per plant, making them nearly unstoppable once they establish themselves in agricultural fields. The unintended consequences of humanity's intervention in plant-animal warfare extend beyond simple pesticide resistance. By dramatically reducing insect populations in agricultural landscapes, synthetic pesticides have disrupted food webs and eliminated many of the natural predators that once helped control pest species. When pesticide-resistant pests emerge, they often face reduced populations of their natural enemies, allowing them to increase even more rapidly than they would have in unmanaged ecosystems. Herbicides have similarly disrupted plant communities, eliminating not just crop weeds but also the diverse plant communities that supported beneficial insects, soil microorganisms, and other components of healthy agricultural ecosystems. The simplified landscapes created by intensive herbicide use can be more vulnerable to pest outbreaks and less resilient to environmental stresses. But human influence on plant-animal warfare extends beyond agriculture into the realm of global environmental change. Climate change is altering the fundamental parameters of plant chemical warfare in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Rising carbon dioxide levels have complex effects on plant defensive chemistry. Higher CO2 concentrations generally increase plant growth rates and carbohydrate production, but they often decrease the production of nitrogen-containing defensive compounds like alkaloids and proteins. This can make plants more nutritious but less well-defended, potentially shifting the balance of power in favor of herbivorous insects. At the same time, rising temperatures are increasing the metabolic rates of insects, potentially making them more voracious and allowing them to complete more generations per year. Warmer temperatures also expand the geographical ranges of many insect species, bringing pests into contact with plant species that may lack appropriate defenses against them. Temperature stress can also affect plant toxin production in complex ways. Some plants increase their production of defensive compounds under heat stress, while others decrease production as they divert energy toward basic survival functions. The net effect varies by species and by the type of stress involved. Shifting precipitation patterns add another layer of complexity. Drought stress typically increases the concentration of defensive compounds in plant tissues, as reduced water content concentrates existing chemicals. But severe drought can also shut down toxin production entirely as plants struggle to maintain basic metabolic functions. These climate-driven changes are creating novel combinations of environmental conditions that plants and their herbivores have never experienced together in evolutionary history. The results are unpredictable and sometimes surprising, with some plant-herbivore relationships becoming more intense while others break down entirely. Perhaps nowhere are these modern changes more apparent than in urban environments, where plants face entirely new sets of challenges and opportunities. Cities create unique chemical environments that are forcing both plants and animals to adapt their warfare strategies in unprecedented ways. Urban air pollution exposes plants to high concentrations of ozone, nitrogen oxides, sulfur compounds, and particulate matter, chemicals that can damage plant tissues and alter their defensive chemistry. Some urban plants have responded by increasing their production of antioxidant compounds, essentially using their natural defensive chemistry to protect themselves against human-generated pollutants. The heat island effect in cities creates temperature stress that can alter plant toxin production. Urban soils often contain heavy metals, salt from de-icing, and other contaminants that force plants to divert energy toward detoxification systems that would normally be used for other purposes. But urban environments also create new opportunities for chemical warfare. Many successful urban weeds are species that produce allelopathic compounds, chemicals that inhibit the growth of competing plants. In the simplified, disturbed environments typical of urban areas, the ability to suppress competitors through chemical warfare can provide significant advantages. Some urban plants have evolved to take advantage of pollution itself as a defensive strategy. Tree of Heaven, an invasive species that thrives in polluted urban environments, produces allelopathic compounds that are particularly effective in soils contaminated with heavy metals and other urban pollutants. The combination of chemical warfare and pollution tolerance makes this species nearly unstoppable in urban environments. The herbivorous insects that have adapted to urban environments show similar innovation in dealing with novel chemical challenges. Urban populations of some insect species have evolved enhanced detoxification systems that allow them to handle not just plant toxins, but also the synthetic chemicals they encounter in polluted urban environments. The diversity of urban plant defenses is remarkable and still being discovered. Urban environments select for plants that can handle multiple stresses simultaneously: air pollution, soil contamination, temperature extremes, limited water, and intense competition for space and resources. The species that succeed in these environments often do so through sophisticated chemical strategies that would be unnecessary in more natural settings. Humanity's role in the ancient plant-animal war has evolved from unwitting participant to active agent of change. Through agriculture, we've created domesticated plants that rely on us for protection rather than their own chemical defenses. Through pesticide use, we've accelerated evolutionary arms races and created new forms of resistance. Through climate change and urbanization, we've altered the fundamental environmental conditions under which plant-animal warfare operates. The modern battlefield looks very different from the one that existed before human intervention. It's more complex in some ways, with synthetic chemicals and novel environmental conditions creating new challenges and opportunities. It's simpler in other ways, with many natural systems replaced by managed landscapes designed for human purposes. But the fundamental dynamics of the ancient war remain unchanged. Plants and animals continue to evolve, adapt, and compete. Chemical warfare continues to drive innovation and specialization. The Red Queen's race continues, now with humanity as both participant and observer in conflicts that began hundreds of millions of years before our species existed. Our modern interventions in plant-animal warfare remind us that humans are not separate from nature, but part of it. Our agricultural and technological activities are themselves evolutionary forces, creating new selection pressures and driving new forms of adaptation. The plants and animals that surround us today are products not just of millions of years of natural evolution, but also of thousands of years of human influence. Understanding this modern dimension of plant-animal warfare is crucial for addressing contemporary challenges in agriculture, conservation, and environmental management. The same evolutionary principles that governed ancient conflicts continue to operate today, but now within human-modified environments and under human-influenced selection pressures. The war between plants and animals continues, but the rules of engagement have changed. We are no longer just observers of this ancient conflict. We are active participants, and the choices we make will determine how this war unfolds in the centuries to come. As we near the end of our journey through the secret battlefields that surround us, it's worth pausing to consider what this ancient war has taught us, not just about plants and animals, but about life itself, and about our own place in the web of relationships that connects all living things on Earth. The chemical arsenal that plants have developed over hundreds of millions of years represents one of the most sophisticated pharmaceutical libraries ever created. Long before humans dreamed of chemistry laboratories or medical schools, plants were perfecting the art of molecular medicine, developing compounds that could heal, harm, or fundamentally alter the biology of any creature that encountered them. Today, Many of our most important medicines are either derived directly from plant defensive compounds or inspired by their molecular structures. The story of aspirin begins with willow bark, which people have used for pain relief for thousands of years. The active compound, salicin, is part of the willow tree's chemical defense system, a weapon designed to deter herbivorous insects that has found new purpose as one of humanity's most widely used medications. Digitalis, the heart medication that has saved countless lives, comes from the foxglove plant, where it serves as a potent toxin designed to stop the hearts of any animals that dare to eat the plant's leaves. The same molecular mechanism that makes digitalis deadly to herbivores makes it therapeutically valuable for humans with certain heart conditions, but only when used in precisely controlled doses. The Madagascar periwinkle, a humble flowering plant, produces compounds that have revolutionized cancer treatment. Vincristine and vinblastine, derived from this plant's defensive chemistry, are now standard chemotherapy drugs used to treat leukemia, lymphoma, and other cancers. The plant evolved these compounds to poison the cells of attacking insects. Human medicine has repurposed them to poison cancer cells. This pattern repeats throughout the history of medicine. Morphine from poppies, quinine from cinchona bark, Taxol from Pacific yew trees. Compound after compound that began as a plant's chemical weapon has found new life as a human therapeutic agent. The pharmacy in the forest is vast and largely unexplored, with scientists estimating that we've investigated the medicinal properties of less than 1% of the world's plant species. But the relationship between plant chemical warfare and human medicine goes deeper than simple drug discovery. The principles that govern how plants deploy their chemical arsenals offer insights into how we might develop more effective and less harmful medical treatments. Plants rarely rely on single compounds for defense. They typically produce complex mixtures of chemicals that work together synergistically. This natural approach to combination therapy is now inspiring new strategies in human medicine, where researchers are exploring how multiple drugs working together might be more effective than single compounds used in isolation. The precision with which plants target their chemical weapons, producing different compounds for different threats, adjusting concentrations based on the level of attack, timing their chemical responses to match seasonal patterns of herbivore activity, offers lessons for precision medicine, where treatments are tailored to individual patients and specific disease conditions. The evolutionary arms race between plants and herbivores has also taught us important lessons about how to approach one of humanity's greatest challenges: feeding a growing population while maintaining healthy agricultural ecosystems. For decades, industrial agriculture has operated on the assumption that the best way to protect crops is to eliminate their natural enemies through chemical intervention. But the rapid evolution of pesticide resistance and the ecological disruption caused by intensive pesticide use have forced us to reconsider this approach. Some of the most promising developments in sustainable agriculture involve working with natural plant defenses rather than against them. Instead of breeding all the defensive compounds out of crop plants and then protecting them with synthetic pesticides, researchers are exploring ways to maintain or enhance crops' natural resistance while still keeping them palatable and nutritious. Companion planting represents one of agriculture's oldest applications of plant chemical warfare principles. When farmers plant basil near tomatoes, they're not just creating an aesthetically pleasing garden, they're deploying the basil's natural allelopathic compounds to suppress weeds and its aromatic chemicals to confuse insect pests that might otherwise attack the prusand tomatoes. The Three Sisters planting system used by indigenous peoples of the Americas, corn, beans, and squash grown together, is a masterclass in agricultural chemical ecology. The corn provides physical support for the beans. The beans fix nitrogen that feeds the corn and squash. The squash's broad leaves and chemical exudates suppress weeds and create a microenvironment that benefits all three crops. Push-pull agriculture, developed for smallholder farmers in Africa, uses plant chemical signals to manipulate insect behavior on a landscape scale. Farmers plant crops that repel pests, the push component, alongside trap crops that attract pests away from the main crop, the pull component. This system uses plants' natural chemical communication abilities to create pest management strategies that require no synthetic pesticides. The emerging field of precision agriculture promises to take these principles even further, using sensors and data analysis to monitor plant stress in real time and respond with targeted interventions that mimic natural plant defense strategies. Instead of blanket pesticide applications, future farms might use precision delivery systems to apply specific defensive compounds only where and when they're needed. But perhaps the most profound lessons from the plant-animal war are not technological or medical, but philosophical. This ancient conflict teaches us about the nature of resilience, the value of diversity, and the complex relationships between competition and cooperation that characterize all living systems. Plants have survived and thrived for hundreds of millions of years, not by eliminating their enemies, but by learning to coexist with them. They've developed chemical arsenals not to wage war of extermination, but to maintain the delicate balances that allow both predator and prey to persist over evolutionary time. The plant-animal war shows us that conflict and cooperation are not opposites, but complementary forces that drive innovation and create complexity. The same evolutionary pressures that create chemical weapons also create the detoxification systems that allow herbivores to survive plant toxins. The same arms races that produce escalating toxicity also produce the specialized relationships that allow some herbivores to turn plant poisons into personal protection. This ancient war demonstrates the power of diversity as a survival strategy. No single defensive compound, no matter how effective, provides perfect protection against all threats. Plants that survive over long periods are those that maintain diverse chemical arsenals, multiple defensive strategies, and the flexibility to respond to changing conditions. The Red Queen's race that drives plant-animal coevolution teaches us that adaptation is not a destination but a continuous process. In a changing world, the species that thrive are not those that achieve perfect solutions to current challenges, but those that maintain the capacity to keep evolving, keep adapting, keep running the race that never ends. For us humans, living in an era of rapid environmental change, these lessons from the plant kingdom offer both guidance and comfort. They remind us that resilience comes not from avoiding conflict, but from learning to thrive within it. They show us that diversity, of strategies, of relationships, of approaches to common challenges, is one of life's most powerful tools for dealing with uncertainty. The plant-animal war also offers a different perspective on what it means to be strong. In human contexts, we often equate strength with the ability to dominate, to eliminate competition, to stand alone against all challenges. But plants show us a different kind of strength, the strength that comes from deep relationships, from chemical conversations that span continents, from partnerships that transform enemies into allies, the fungal networks that connect forest plants, the bacterial partnerships that allow legumes to fix nitrogen, the ant bodyguards that protect acacia trees. These relationships remind us that true resilience often comes not from independence, but from interdependence. The strongest plants are often those that are most deeply embedded in networks of mutual support and benefit. As we face our own species' challenges, climate change, biodiversity loss, resource scarcity, social conflict, the ancient wisdom of plant-animal warfare offers insights that go far beyond agriculture and medicine. It reminds us that sustainable solutions often involve working with natural processes rather than against them, that diversity strengthens systems rather than weakening them, and that the most lasting victories are often those that benefit all parties involved. The secret war between plants and animals has been raging for hundreds of millions of years, and it will continue long after our own species has passed from the earth. But in its endless creativity, its remarkable innovations, and its demonstration of life's capacity to find balance within conflict, this ancient war offers us a source of wonder, wisdom, and hope. In learning to see the world through the lens of plant-animal warfare, we discover that we are surrounded not by a static natural world, but by a dynamic theatre where new dramas unfold every day, where ancient stories continue to evolve, and where the simple act of a caterpillar eating a leaf connects us to evolutionary narratives that stretch back to the very origins of complex life on Earth. This is the ultimate gift of understanding the secret war that surrounds us. Not just knowledge of how the natural world works, but a deeper appreciation for our place within it, and a recognition that we are all participants in stories much larger and more magnificent than we ever imagined. Here we are again, you and I, in that same moonlit garden where our journey began. But how different everything looks now through eyes that have learned to see the invisible wars raging all around us. The peaceful scene before us, Perhaps it's the view from your window, or a memory of a garden you love, or simply the landscape painted by your imagination as you listen to these words, has been transformed by knowledge into something far more complex and wonderful than we could have imagined when we first stepped into this story. Together, the white flowers that seemed so innocent in the moonlight, nodding gently in the evening breeze, are now revealed as sophisticated chemical factories, their petals and leaves humming with molecular activity that never ceases. Those elegant roses climbing the garden wall are armed with thorns both visible and invisible, the sharp spikes we can see and the chemical compounds we cannot, working together in an ancient defensive strategy refined over millions of years of evolutionary warfare. The grass beneath our feet, which once seemed like nothing more than a green carpet, now reveals itself as a complex battlefield where individual plants wage chemical warfare against their neighbors, secreting allelopathic compounds into the soil, negotiating with fungal partners through underground networks, and constantly adjusting their defensive chemistry in response to threats both seen and unseen. Even the gentle flutter of night-flying moths around the garden lights tells a different story now. We understand that these seemingly random movements are actually precise chemical conversations, the moths following molecular trails that speak of nectar rewards, potential mates, and suitable places to lay eggs, while the plants broadcast their own chemical advertisements, honest offers and elaborate deceptions intermingled in the evening air. The very soil that anchors this peaceful scene is alive with chemical negotiations that would make a diplomat envious. Root systems extending far beyond what we can see above ground are engaged in constant conversations with bacterial partners, fungal allies, and plant competitors. Resources are being traded, territories claimed, alliances formed and broken, all through the exchange of molecular messages that flow through the darkness like an internet made of chemistry rather than electricity. This transformation of our perception is perhaps the most profound gift that knowledge can offer. The ability to see the extraordinary within the ordinary, to recognize the epic dramas playing out in the most mundane corners of the natural world. What once seemed simple becomes complex. What appeared static reveals itself as dynamically active, and what looked peaceful shows its true nature as the site of conflicts more sophisticated than anything in human history. But this new understanding doesn't diminish the beauty of the garden. It amplifies it, knowing that each leaf is a laboratory, each flower a chemical communication device, each root system a network node in a vast underground internet. We find ourselves witnesses to a level of complexity and elegance that surpasses any human engineering. The garden becomes not less magical with understanding, but more so. The peace we perceive in this moonlit scene is real, but it's not the peace of inactivity or the absence of conflict. It's the peace of balance, the harmony that emerges when opposing forces find ways to coexist, when ancient enemies discover that their conflicts can be creative rather than destructive, when warfare itself becomes a form of evolutionary artistry that creates rather than destroys. This is perhaps the most important lesson from our journey through the secret war between plants and animals. That conflict and peace are not opposites, but partners in the dance of life. The chemical battles raging invisibly around us have not created a world of devastation and destruction, but a world of breathtaking diversity and beauty. The arms races between plants and herbivores have not led to the elimination of either side, but to the evolution of forms and relationships so intricate and elegant that they inspire wonder in anyone who takes the time to truly observe them. Think of the monarch butterfly, transformed from a simple herbivorous insect into a flying advertisement for the power of chemical warfare, its brilliant orange wings, a testament to millions of years of coevolution with toxic milkweed plants. The beauty of its coloration exists because of conflict, not despite it. The precision of its migration, the sophistication of its chemical defenses, the elegance of its life cycle, all are products of the ancient war between plants and animals, refined and perfected through countless generations of evolutionary arms racing. Consider the delicate relationship between flowering plants and their pollinators, a partnership born from what was once pure exploitation. Early flowers evolved their colors, scents, and nectar not as gifts to insects, but as bribes and manipulations designed to trick animals into providing reproductive services. Yet from this foundation of deception grew some of the most beautiful and mutually beneficial relationships in nature. partnerships so intimate that many plants and their pollinators literally cannot survive without each other. The chemical communications that flow between plants create landscapes of invisible beauty that exist parallel to the visual beauty we can perceive. The warning signals that trees send to their neighbors about insect attacks, the chemical negotiations between roots and soil microorganisms, the molecular advertisements that flowers broadcast to attract pollinators, these form a kind of chemical symphony playing constantly around us, a music of molecules that we're only just beginning to learn how to hear. Even the predator-prey relationships that seem most violent and destructive reveal themselves, upon closer examination, to be part of larger patterns of balance and sustainability. The caterpillar that devours the leaf, the aphid that taps into the plant's vascular system, the beetle that bores into bark. Each is playing a role in ecological relationships that have been refined over geological timescales to create systems that can persist indefinitely. The plant doesn't simply suffer these attacks passively. It responds with chemical defenses that are marvels of precision and timing. It may call for help from predatory insects, release toxins that sicken its attackers, or alter its chemistry to make itself less nutritious or more difficult to digest. The herbivore, in turn, may have evolved countermeasures, detoxification systems, behavioral strategies, or partnerships with gut bacteria that allow it to handle the plant's chemical weapons. The result is not mutual destruction, but a kind of ecological dance in which each partner's moves constrain and inspire the other's responses. The predator shapes the prey's defenses. The prey shapes the predator's hunting strategies. Over time, both become more sophisticated, more beautiful, more perfectly adapted to their roles in the larger community of life. This dance of coevolution creates diversity not just of species, but of relationships, strategies, and solutions to the fundamental challenges of survival. In any given ecosystem, we find not one way of being a plant or one way of being an herbivore, but dozens or hundreds of different approaches to these basic life strategies. Some plants invest heavily in chemical defenses, others rely on rapid growth and reproduction. Some herbivores specialize on single plant species, others generalize across many different food sources. The result is a biological marketplace of extraordinary richness, where different strategies for survival and reproduction can coexist and even support each other. The diversity we see in nature, the almost overwhelming variety of forms, colors, behaviors, and lifestyles, emerges from the creative tension between cooperation and competition, between the need to survive and the need to thrive, between the pressure to conform and the advantage of being different. This insight transforms our understanding of what conflict means and what it can create. In human contexts, we often think of conflict as purely destructive, as something to be avoided or resolved as quickly as possible. But the natural world shows us that certain kinds of conflict, the kind that operates within constraints, that allows for multiple solutions, that creates feedback loops between opposing forces, can be profoundly creative. The constraints in natural conflicts are important. Plants cannot eliminate all herbivores without losing their pollinators and seed dispersers. Herbivores cannot evolve such effective detoxification systems that they eliminate all plant chemical defenses, because they rely on some of those same compounds for their own protection. Predators cannot become so efficient that they eliminate all their prey, because they would then eliminate themselves. These constraints force creative solutions. Instead of simple escalation toward maximum lethality, we see the evolution of sophisticated strategies that allow multiple players to coexist. Instead of winner-take-all competitions, we see the emergence of complex communities where different species occupy different niches and employ different strategies for success. The feedback loops in natural conflicts create opportunities for innovation and adaptation that wouldn't exist in the absence of opposing forces. The pressure from herbivores drives plants to evolve new chemical defenses, which creates opportunities for herbivores to evolve new detoxification mechanisms, which creates pressure for plants to develop more sophisticated defenses, and so on. Each cycle of this evolutionary spiral creates new possibilities, new forms, new relationships. This understanding of conflict as a creative force offers profound insights for how we might approach challenges in our own lives and societies. Instead of seeing opposition as something to be crushed or avoided, we might learn to see it as an opportunity for growth, innovation, and the discovery of solutions that wouldn't emerge in the absence of challenge. The plant-animal war also teaches us about the importance of diversity as a survival strategy. No single approach to defense or attack dominates across all environments and conditions. Plants that invest everything in chemical warfare may be vulnerable to specialists that can overcome their toxins. Plants that rely entirely on rapid reproduction may be outcompeted by species that invest more heavily in individual offspring. Herbivores that specialize too narrowly may face extinction if their host plants disappear. Those that generalize too broadly may be outcompeted by specialists in any given environment. The most successful lineages over evolutionary time are often those that maintain diversity within their ranks. Different species pursuing different strategies, different populations adapting to different local conditions, different individuals carrying different genetic variants that might prove valuable under changing circumstances. This biological principle of diversity as strength has clear applications to human systems as well. Ecosystems are more resilient when they contain many different species playing many different roles. Economies are more stable when they include many different industries and approaches to creating value. Communities are stronger when they include people with different skills, perspectives, and backgrounds. But perhaps the deepest lesson from the plant-animal war concerns the nature of interconnectedness itself. The more we understand about the chemical communications flowing between species, the underground networks connecting distant plants, the cascading effects of changes in one part of an ecosystem on other parts, the more we realize that the boundaries between individual organisms are much more fluid than they appear. A tree is not just a tree, it's a community of organisms including the tree itself, the fungi that connect its roots to soil nutrients and other plants, the bacteria that live in its rhizosphere and help it access nitrogen and other resources, the lichens and mosses that grow on its bark, the insects that pollinate its flowers and disperse its seeds, and the countless other species that depend on it for habitat, food, and shelter. When we understand these relationships, the question, what is good for the tree, becomes much more complex. What benefits the tree's immediate survival might harm its fungal partners or the insects that depend on it. What supports the tree's reproduction might compete with the needs of its offspring or neighbors. The tree's welfare is inseparable from the welfare of the community of organisms that surround and interpenetrate it. This web of interdependence extends far beyond individual ecosystems. The monarch butterflies that overwinter in Mexico depend on milkweed plants across much of North America. The migratory birds that carry seeds between distant habitats connect plant communities separated by thousands of miles. The atmospheric transport of chemical signals allows plants to communicate across continents, warning of pest outbreaks, or coordinating reproductive timing. At the largest scales, the chemical warfare between plants and animals influences the composition of Earth's atmosphere, the cycling of nutrients through soil and water, and the climate patterns that affect all life on the planet. The oxygen we breathe is a product of plant photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide that plants use for photosynthesis comes partly from the respiration of the animals that eat them. The nitrogen that plants incorporate into their proteins comes from bacteria that have evolved complex relationships with plant roots. These global-scale connections remind us that we humans are not observers standing outside the system we're studying, but participants embedded within it. Our own bodies are ecosystems, hosting trillions of bacterial cells that help us digest our food and maintain our health. The food we eat connects us directly to the plant-animal warfare we've been exploring. Every bite contains compounds that evolved as weapons or defenses in ancient conflicts between species. The medicines we derive from plants link us to millions of years of evolutionary warfare. The crops we grow represent our intervention in these ancient conflicts, our decision to ally ourselves with certain plants and protect them from their natural enemies. The pesticides we use make us participants in evolutionary arms races that began long before our species existed. Even our aesthetic preferences connect us to the plant-animal war. Many of the colors, scents, and forms that we find beautiful in nature evolved as signals in chemical communication between species. The reds and oranges that we find so striking in autumn leaves may have evolved as warning signals to insects, advertisements of the tree's chemical defenses. The fragrances that we find pleasant in flowers evolved to attract pollinators or repel herbivores. Our sense of what landscapes look natural or healthy is often based on our unconscious recognition of the patterns created by balanced ecological relationships, the diversity that emerges from sustainable, competition, the harmony that arises from ancient partnerships, the resilience that comes from complex networks of mutual dependence. Understanding our place within these larger patterns can be both humbling and inspiring. Humbling because it reminds us that we are part of something much larger and older than ourselves, that our individual actions ripple out through networks of relationship that extend far beyond what we can see or predict. Inspiring because it reveals that we are participants in a story of such scope and grandeur that it dwarfs any human narrative. The chemical conversations happening right now in the soil beneath your feet connect you to processes that began billions of years ago when the first plants began producing oxygen and fundamentally altered Earth's atmosphere. The oxygen you're breathing as you listen to these words was produced by plants engaged in the ancient warfare we've been exploring. The carbon in your body was once part of carbon dioxide that plants extracted from the atmosphere as raw material for their chemical weapons and defenses. You are literally made from the products of the plant-animal war. The proteins in your muscles, the fats in your cell membranes, the sugars that fuel your brain, all were assembled from molecules that plants created through photosynthesis, defended with chemical weapons, and shared through the food webs that connect all living things. This material connection to the ancient warfare of plants and animals is complemented by deeper connections of process and pattern. The same evolutionary mechanisms that drive plant-animal arms races also shaped the evolution of our own species. The same principles of diversity, adaptation, and coevolution that create beauty and resilience in natural ecosystems can guide us toward beauty and resilience in our human communities. The chemical communication systems that allow plants to coordinate their defenses across landscapes offer models for how we might better coordinate our own responses to shared challenges. The resource-sharing networks that connect forest plants through fungal partnerships suggest approaches to creating more equitable and sustainable human economic systems. The long-term thinking embedded in plant defense strategies, the investment in chemical weapons that may not pay off for years or decades, the maintenance of genetic diversity that provides options for unpredictable future challenges, offers lessons for how we might approach our own long-term challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, and social inequality. But beyond these practical applications, understanding the plant-animal war offers something even more valuable, a sense of wonder and belonging that can sustain us through difficult times. When we recognize that we are part of a story that has been unfolding for hundreds of millions of years, that will continue for millions of years into the future, our daily struggles and concerns find their place within a larger context of meaning and purpose. The conflicts we face in our own lives, the competition for resources, the challenges of cooperation, the need to balance individual needs with community welfare, are variations on themes that have been playing out in the natural world for geological ages. We are not the first species to face these challenges, and we will not be the last. But we may be the first species with the capacity to understand our place within these larger patterns and to choose consciously how we want to participate in them. This understanding can be a source of both comfort and responsibility. Comfort because it reminds us that life has faced and overcome challenges far greater than anything we currently confront, that the creative forces of evolution are still at work, that the same processes that created the extraordinary diversity and beauty we see in nature continue to operate today. Responsibility because it reveals that our choices matter, that our actions ripple out through networks of connection and consequence that extend far beyond our immediate awareness. The garden outside your window, the plants in your home, the food on your table, all are participants in the ancient war we've been exploring, and all connect you to the ongoing story of life on Earth. Every time you water a houseplant, you're providing resources for an organism that descended from lineages that spent millions of years perfecting chemical warfare. Every time you enjoy the fragrance of a flower, you're experiencing signals that evolved to communicate across species boundaries. Every time you eat, you're consuming the products of evolutionary conflicts that shaped the chemistry of life itself. But perhaps most importantly, every time you step outside and truly observe the natural world around you, really look at the leaves on the trees, really notice the insects going about their business, really pay attention to the complex web of relationships that surrounds you, you're connecting with something larger and more ancient than human civilization, something that puts our daily concerns into perspective while simultaneously revealing the profound significance of every moment of awareness. The moonlit garden where we began this journey is the same garden where we find ourselves now, but our capacity to appreciate its beauty and complexity has been transformed. We can still enjoy its peaceful appearance, still find rest and restoration in its quiet presence, but now we also see the invisible dramas playing out all around us, the chemical conversations that never cease, the evolutionary stories that continue to unfold. This dual vision, the ability to see both the surface piece and the underlying complexity, both the immediate beauty and the deep patterns that create and sustain it, is perhaps the greatest gift that scientific understanding can offer. It doesn't replace wonder with knowledge, but deepens wonder through knowledge. It doesn't reduce mystery to mechanism, but reveals new mysteries within the mechanisms we discover. The chemical war between plants and animals will continue long after our individual lives have ended, long after our species has passed from the earth. But in this moment, in this quiet space we've shared together, we have had the privilege of glimpsing something of its beauty and significance. We have been witnesses to one of evolution's greatest masterpieces, observers of conflicts that create rather than destroy, students of warfare that generates peace. As you prepare to leave this garden and return to your daily life, carry with you the knowledge that you are surrounded always by wonders beyond imagination, that the most ordinary moments connect you to extraordinary processes, that every breath you take links you to the ancient story of life on Earth. The plants around you are not just decorations or resources, but partners in the ongoing experiment of existence, fellow travelers on the journey that began billions of years ago, when the first molecules learned to make copies of themselves, and continues today in every garden, every forest, every patch of weeds growing through cracks in sidewalks. The chemical messages flowing invisibly through the air around you, the molecular negotiations happening in the soil beneath your feet, the evolutionary conversations that connect every living thing to every other living thing, these continue whether we're aware of them or not. But awareness transforms us from unconscious participants to conscious witnesses, from passive beneficiaries to active partners in the greatest story ever told. Rest well, knowing that you are part of something magnificent, something that transcends individual existence, while simultaneously making every individual existence meaningful. Dream peacefully, surrounded by the quiet warfare that creates beauty, sustained by the ancient partnerships that make life possible, connected through invisible threads of chemistry and evolution to every other living thing that has ever existed or ever will exist. And when you wake, whether it's tomorrow morning or next week or months from now, when you happen to remember this journey we've shared, step outside if you can and look with new eyes at whatever green things you can find. See them not just as plants, but as chemical warriors in an ancient conflict, as partners in evolutionary dances that began long before humans walked the earth, as participants in networks of communication and cooperation that span continents and connect across species boundaries. Listen, if you're very quiet and very still, for the chemical conversations that surround you always. They're there, the molecular messages flowing between root and soil, the airborne signals traveling from damaged leaf to neighboring plant, the chemical negotiations that determine which flowers will be visited by which pollinators, which seeds will germinate in which locations, which relationships will flourish and which will fade. You won't be able to hear these conversations directly, of course. They're conducted in languages of molecules rather than sounds. But knowing they exist, understanding something of their complexity and significance, recognizing your place within the vast web of relationships they create and maintain, this knowledge itself is a kind of listening, a form of participation in the ongoing conversation between all living things. The secret war between plants and animals is secret no longer, at least not for you. You've learned to see the invisible conflicts, to appreciate the creative power of evolutionary arms races, to recognize the beauty that emerges from millions of years of chemical warfare. You understand now that the peace we perceive in nature is not the peace of inactivity, but the peace of balance, the harmony that emerges when ancient enemies learn to dance together in patterns of mutual benefit and sustainable conflict. This understanding changes everything and nothing. The world looks the same, but you see it differently. The garden is still peaceful, but now you know the complexity that underlies its peace. The flowers are still beautiful, but now you understand something of the evolutionary processes that created their beauty. The plants still grow quietly in their chosen places, But now you recognize the sophistication of their chemical strategies and the elegance of their evolutionary solutions to the challenges of existence. You carry with you now a secret of your own, the knowledge that you live in a world far more wonderful and complex than most people imagine, a world where every leaf is a laboratory and every root system is a communication network, where the air itself is alive with chemical messages and the soil pulses with molecular negotiations that determine the fate of ecosystems. This secret is yours to keep or share as you choose. You might find yourself looking more carefully at plants, noticing details you never paid attention to before, wondering about the chemical stories behind the colors and scents and forms you encounter. You might find yourself more aware of the food you eat, more conscious of your connections to the agricultural systems that sustain you, more appreciative of the evolutionary processes that made your existence possible. Or you might simply carry this knowledge quietly within you, a source of wonder and perspective that enriches your daily experience without necessarily changing your outward behavior. Either way, you've been transformed by our journey together, and that transformation connects you more deeply to the living world that surrounds and sustains you. The chemical war between plants and animals continues in this very moment, as it has for hundreds of millions of years, as it will for millions of years to come. But now you know something of its beauty and significance. Now you understand your place within it. Now you can rest in the knowledge that you are part of something larger and more magnificent than any human story. Something that creates beauty through conflict and finds peace within eternal struggle. Sleep well tonight, not in ignorance of the world's turmoil, but in awe of its silent resilience. You rest not in escape from struggle, but at the heart of it, wrapped in the quiet theater of a world that is constantly becoming. Sweet dreams from the battlefield, this strange, beautiful world where conflict and cooperation intertwine to produce everything we hold dear. The garden around you is not merely a place of stillness. It is a site of ancient strategy, where the very air you breathe has been refined by millions of years of invisible negotiations. You sleep in a world that was shaped not by ease, but by effort. Every breath is a molecular heirloom from the earliest forms of life, oxygen forged by cyanobacteria, inherited by plants, and shared generously with every creature that now inhales it, including you. This is the true wonder, that you are sustained by a lineage of cooperation masked as competition. Each heartbeat connects you to an unfolding narrative that stretches across eons. The war between predator and prey, plant and herbivore, pathogen and immune system, it is not merely a conflict but a symphony of checks and balances, a choreography refined over deep time to create the richness and resilience of life as we know it. The war is ancient, but it creates beauty. Think of the iridescent wings of a butterfly, the intoxicating scent of a night-blooming flower, the defensive thorns of a rose, the camouflage of a moth. All are evolutionary responses born from the need to survive, and yet they have given us poetry, fragrance, wonder. What was meant to deter or attract has also inspired. The ongoing struggle births not only survival but splendor. The conflict is eternal, but it generates peace. In forests, competition for sunlight leads to towering trees, but also to cooperation among roots via fungal networks, so-called wood-wide webs, where nutrients are shared, warnings exchanged, and the weak supported. Beneath the visible scuffle lies a web of mutual aid. This is not the peace of stillness, but of equilibrium, a dynamic balance that sustains entire ecosystems. The struggle continues, but it produces wonder. Evolution's relentless experimentation has given rise to all that astonishes us: electric eels, photosynthetic sea slugs, birds of paradise, deep-sea creatures that shimmer with bioluminescence. The more we learn about life, the more miraculous it becomes. Struggle is not the opposite of beauty, it is often its cause. And you, fragile and miraculous, curious and cautious, you are both witness and participant in this epic. You are not a spectator to nature, but an expression of it. Not a visitor to Earth, but its child, its co-creator. In the garden of wonders that surrounds you, you are student and teacher alike. The living Earth is your classroom, your home, your heritage. Every lesson is there for those who look. A tree bending towards sunlight teaches resilience. A mushroom sprouting overnight whispers of unseen potential. A spiderweb glinting with dew reveals the strength in delicacy. Even the weeds that return, no matter how often they're pulled, remind us of persistence, of life's refusal to be erased. Sleep now and dream of molecular dances. Picture your cells, each one a tiny universe, carrying out the instructions encoded by generations of survival. Within you are the echoes of fish, the shadows of ferns, the remnants of stars. Your mitochondria, the power plants of your cells, were once independent organisms, long ago incorporated into the architecture of life. You are not just human, you are a chorus of ancient collaborations. Dream of chemical conversations, the subtle signaling of plants warning each other of danger, the hormonal messages that guide your own feelings and thoughts, the language of scent, taste, light, and vibration that governs relationships in nature far beyond what our eyes can see. The world is always talking. We have only to quiet ourselves to hear it. Dream of evolutionary partnerships that span geological time. Lichens, part fungus, part algae, are ancient examples of symbiosis, so stable it's hard to tell where one organism ends and the other begins. Coral reefs, built by tiny creatures and guarded by countless others, are bustling metropolises of mutual benefit. Even our own bodies host trillions of microbes whose survival is entwined with ours, shaping our digestion, immune systems, even our moods. Outside your window, in the quiet night, the garden wages its gentle wars. Insects nibble, plants defend, roots probe the earth while leaves reach for the stars. Even in sleep, life does not pause. Morning dew forms through a balance of temperature and chemistry, ready to transmit its silent codes of hydration, warning, and growth. Every dewdrop carries information. Every sunrise reveals a renewed world. And each time you wake, you return to a living system that never stops growing, evolving, and negotiating. You are not outside of this, you are this. Rest not just as a tired individual, but as a being held in Earth's web of wisdom. You are not lost. You are home, part of the great rhythm that includes peace and struggle, rest and renewal. When you wake, the ancient war will still be here, not of destruction, but of creation. It's the tension that gave rise to feathers, flowers, and thought, a force that made you not only as a survivor, but as a participant in life's ongoing masterpiece. Perhaps it's not a war at all, but the art of becoming conflict and harmony intertwined, like music woven from life's complexity. So sleep, and dream not of escape, but of deep belonging. Let your breath echo the tides, your heartbeat drum with the pulse of the garden. And when you rise, let your life sing with what you've remembered. That wonder is everywhere, and you are a miracle of stardust, water, and time. Sweet dreams from the battlefield where life still blooms.